Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to take this off of here because that's not very sensitive. There we go. For those who don't know me, my name's Daniel Horan, and I'm professor of philosophy, religious studies, and theology, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's College. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to this Ex Libris Author Lecture Series event. It's a special one, if you haven't noticed already. We've got 3 fantastic guests with us. First, let me say just a bit for those who aren't familiar with the center, what we're all about. Founded in 1984 by Dr. Keith Egan with the generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross, the Center for Spirituality offers programs that promote the engagement between faith and reason and the connection between mind, body, and spirit. A hub for scholarly and public engagement, we draw on intellectual resources in the Catholic and broader Christian heritage, as well as how individuals practice faith in their daily lives to develop critical conversations around contemporary religious issues, especially as they relate to women's experiences in society, the academy, and the church. Before we proceed with our exciting event this afternoon, we wish to acknowledge that we are gathering on sacred land, and to honor the native peoples who have been the traditional custodians of this place for generations. We particularly recognize the Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi and the Miami, who have cared for this land and its resources for many generations and continue to do so today. With deep gratitude, we recognize our indigenous siblings and their cultures within our community, as well as acknowledging the land upon which we gather, pray, learn, and work. So the format for our program this afternoon is threefold. First, our 3 panelists will offer brief presentations about their work in this volume. Next, I will engage the panelists in a conversation on themes of their book. And finally, we're going to open up the floor to all of you, those gathered here in person and those joining us virtually through the live stream. We'll ask that those joining us by live stream, please send your questions or comments through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or enter them into the chat. We're joined by Dr. Julia Feder and Miss Rebecca Holm, who are holding down the fort back there, so we thank them for their work. Just one more reminder before I introduce our guests this afternoon, that the campus bookstore has copies of Unruly Catholic Feminists available for sale in the lobby today. And we have our editors and author with us, so please stop by there, take a look at it, consider buying a copy, and once you buy it, by all means, ask our guests to sign it. I'm sure they would be happy to do so. Now it's my privilege to introduce our 3 guests today. We're not in the order that I had the list of names, so maybe I'll start with my immediate left, your right, Dr. Leigh Eicke. She is a writer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She studied and taught British literature, writing about Jane Barker, Anne Finch, and other British women writers. She's the co-editor with Jeana DelRosso and Anna Kothe, am I saying that correctly? Yeah. Who's the 3rd editor of these series that unfortunately is not able to join us in person today, of several volumes, including Unruly Catholic Feminists, Prose, Poetry, and the Future of the Faith, which we're here to discuss today, Unruly Catholic Nuns, Sisters Stories, published in 2017 in the same series, and I'm happy to point out that we have some unruly Catholic sisters with us in the crowd, not naming names, but you know who they are. And the Catholic Church and Unruly Women Writers, Critical Essays. The other volume in that series was titled Unruly Catholic Women Writers, Creative Responses to Catholicism. Currently, Dr. Eicke writes about reading and writing after a brain injury, and she works in adult literacy, organizes a local inclusion and equity reading group, and serves in community engagement at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our next guest is Dr. Jeana DelRosso, who is the Sister Mara Eichner Endowed Chair of English, and she is Professor of English and Women's Studies at Notre Dame of Maryland University in Baltimore. She is the author of Writing Catholic Women, Contemporary International Catholic Girlhood Narratives, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2005. And she is as well co-editor with Leigh Eicke and Anna Kothe of the 4 volumes I mentioned already. Her articles have appeared in books as well as in such journals as the NWSA Journal, MELUS, and the Journal of Popular Culture, and her short fiction has appeared in the Bangalore Review. Congratulations. I know that's hot off the press, isn't it? Yes. And last but not least, our third panelist is Miss Lizzie Wiley, who joins us from St. Louis, Missouri, where she works as a copywriter at a marketing agency. She studied theology and English at Loyola University Chicago, right up the road, and went on to earn her Master's of Theological Studies from Boston College's School of Theology and Ministry. As a fellow eagle with an eagle mug, go BC, I'll just add that there. When she's not writing for work, she dabbles in writing poetry, but most of her creative energy is spent reading fictional books, many about witches, I'm told. Lizzie married her spouse last year, and they are happy dog parents to 2 German shepherds. In her free time, Lizzie practices yoga and taekwondo. So we have 3 extraordinary guests with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leigh to kick us off.
Many thanks to Dan Horan for the invitation to share our work with you. It was a delight to visit Dr. Rebecca Lehman's poetry workshop, meet her students, and tell them a bit about our experience putting together these volumes. And we got a terrific campus visit after that, which we enjoyed very much. I'm going to offer a brief description of our first 3 books and then hand the conversation over to Jeana. So, Unruly Catholic Feminists, Poetry, Prose, and the Future of the Faith is the 4th project that we've worked on together. Jeana, Anna, and I met in graduate school at the University of Maryland, and not long after graduation, at an Attending to Early Modern Women conference, Anna and I started talking about putting together a collection of critical essays addressing women of faith, Catholicism, and feminism. This topic we believed was largely unaddressed, and we wanted to expand beyond our fields of Renaissance and early modern periods, and we knew that Jeana focused on such issues with 20th century American writers. Our first collection, The Catholic Church and Unruly Women Writers, Critical Essays, pursues these topics, including writers from the medieval period through the early 21st century. The essays covered varied perspectives on both canonical and lesser-known Catholic women writers, all focusing on unruliness in what is commonly thought of as this restrictive site of writing for women, Catholicism. Some of the writers discussed include Teresa of Avila, Marjorie Kemp, Sor Juana de la Cruz, women in English convents of the early modern period, Marie Laveau, known as the Voodoo Queen, and Sister Helen Préjean. 2 specific essays were Anna Kothy's Resituating Caraval's Vida in Proto-Novelistic Narratives, and Jeana's Catholicism's Others, Holy Trinity, Race, Class, and Gender, and Black Catholic Girls' School Narratives. In all of these essays, rather than simply oppressing or containing women, Catholicism drove or inspired these writers to challenge literary, social, political, or religious hierarchies. Our second collection, Unruly Catholic Women Writers, Creative Responses to Catholicism. Even though our goal had been for scholarly articles in our first collection, we'd received so many creative submissions that we decided to pursue a second collection, this time focusing on contemporary responses to Catholicism. I'll share a few words from our introduction. Catholicism is a mystery, or so Flannery O'Connor, perhaps the best-known American Catholic woman writer. We can discuss that later if you like. She suggests in her foundational text, Mystery and Manners, Christian dogma, she writes, is about the only thing left in the world that surely guards and respects mystery. Inspired by the devotion to Mary and the occasion of the Rosary with women, we've approached the mysteries of the Rosary and of this first woman of the New Testament with an eye for the various paths that women take today and the various decisions we make in our lives. Our reading of the joyful mysteries, like the first decade of the Rosary, continues to invoke motherhood, childbearing, and child-rearing, but the writers in this section of our anthology may view those particular mysteries differently, or may make some alternative choices altogether. Our version of the sorrowful mysteries still includes stories about pain and death, like the second decade, but we look at other forms of pain that women experience, both in and through the church, such as alienation from the church community through divorce or sexuality. And our glorious mysteries explore the ways in which Catholic sacraments and ritual, combined with female unruliness, offer new versions for a Catholic future for women. Indeed, many of these stories demonstrate women's willingness, even eagerness, to embrace the Catholic faith, despite the obstacles. When we began to think about it, the third book in our Unruly Catholic Women Writers series, we knew, I held the wrong one. Sorry, here it is. We knew what stories we knew exactly whom we wanted to represent, what stories we wanted to relate, which voices we wanted to make heard, religious women. We wanted to tell the sister stories, and we knew those stories were out there. We also knew exactly what and whom we were referring to when we were thinking of unruly nuns, although the nuns we reached out to frequently did not see themselves that way. One told us she wasn't unruly enough to be in our volume. Others demurred, saying they had nothing to write. And even when they submitted something to us, many sisters offered disclaimers to their pieces, referring to them as incomplete or a draft or just some ideas. This is characteristic of nuns, unwilling to talk about themselves, unassuming in regard to their own work and abilities, humble to a fault. But we know who they really are. They're Sister Simone Campbell, the voice behind Nuns on the Bus, addressing social justice issues such as immigration reform and welfare legislation across the United States. Their sister Janine Gramick, known for her work with the LGBTQ+ community, and sometimes they're ostracized from the Catholic Church. In our volume, unruliness presents itself in two ways. First, in terms of how the sisters challenge cultural hegemonies and governmental policies or regimes, and secondly, in regard to how they challenge the Church itself. While Pope Francis chose his name in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, who dedicated himself to the poor and who inspired St. Clare to do the same, we, the editors, see the sisters in this volume as following in the vision of an anchoress who lived and worked not long after these Catholic saints, around the turn of the 15th century, Julian of Norwich, the first Englishwoman of letters. In Showings, she writes that, "As unruly as God is our Father, so truly is God our Mother. Our Father wills, our Mother works, our good Lord the Holy Spirit confirms, and therefore it is our part to love our God in whom we have our being, reverently thanking and praising him for our creation, mightily praying to our Mother for mercy and pity, and to the Holy Spirit for help and grace." We therefore have divided the pieces in this volume into 3 sections based on Julian's words. Our Father wills, our Mother works, our good Lord the Holy Spirit confirms. The writings in part 1 of this anthology demonstrate, first and foremost, how nuns have followed and continue to pursue the Word of God in their daily deeds and in how they live their lives. The Mother's work. While the texts herein reference the Blessed Virgin Mary as Mother, they likewise see the face of God not just as the Father, but as also Mother, with all the cultural connotations this image evokes. The term mother also invokes the leadership position in Catholic women's religious communities of the Mother Superior, who plays a critical role in the lives of those in her community. Most significantly, however, Julian's invocation of the Mother inserts women into the Holy Trinity, asserting a position for women in church doctrine, just as our contributors assert the value and significance of women in the Church. Finally, in part 3, we include 3 pieces that examine the Holy Spirit, working with individuals both within and outside the Church, confirms the good work that these sisters have done and continue to do in our neighborhoods, our communities, our nations, and our world, and offers grace and assistance to sisters in times of trial. The sisters in this volume are indeed working for God's will, Mother's mercy, and the Holy Spirit's grace. through them all, we can see the light of God's grace on earth. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So when we had completed our Unruly Catholic Nuns book and had been, as we were doing it, we were certainly thinking about our colleagues and many of our friends who were nuns and former nuns. We were trying to decide what we were going to turn our attention to next. And we started to think about our students. So we thought, well, what is the future of this? Like, where is the Catholic Church going? And so that was then the impetus for Unruly Catholic Feminists, Prose, Poetry, and the Future of the Faith. And we were really interested in third and fourth wave feminists and how they were responding to Catholicism. So I'm going to read you some of the introduction to this book to give you some context for what we were thinking and what we really wanted to achieve with this volume. And I'll start with our dedication, which is for the church daughters. May they be our future leaders. Countless women around the world find ourselves rooted in Catholic traditions, while simultaneously yearning for a church that will grow with us and become something better than and for us. Despite our love for the richness of the Catholic culture, many of us cannot forgive the Church's continual and persistent failure of so many of its constituents, particularly women. The Me Too movement inspired many women to share stories and protest against sexual assault, and it has motivated Roman Catholic women to speak out too. Anyone who has seen the Netflix series The Watchers, which shows women active in researching and revealing the truth about such issues, would be hard-pressed to keep their faith in the Catholic Church and especially its clergy, who undertake, participate in, and cover up the sexual abuse of young girls and boys by Catholic priests. Pope Francis has made some movement toward progress in the Church by advocating for the poor and supporting environmental conservation. And he has even made overtures toward women by commissioning 2 consecutive studies regarding the possibility of the diaconate for lay women and women religious, for which there is historical precedent in the early, although not the modern church, but there is certainly long-time precedent in other Christian faiths. Furthermore, Pope Francis named the first woman to a managerial position in the Vatican's most important office, the Secretariat of State. He's also loosened the communion restrictions on divorced and remarried Catholics. Yet we would argue that his reforms have been limited at best. For one, he has only just begun to support the victims of clergy sexual abuse. While Francis in 2014 appointed a commission for the protection of minors, it wasn't until August 2018 that he released a letter acknowledging the failures of the Church. And this is his quote: "We did not act in a timely manner, realizing the magnitude and the gravity of the damage done to so many lives. We showed no care for the little ones." And Francis has been particularly disappointing to women's groups seeking equality in the church hierarchy. That first woman in the Secretariat did not replace a man, but rather was offered a new title for continuing to do work she was already doing. And as of this writing, no progress has been made on women's ordination to the diaconate, and the ordination of women to the priesthood remains a non-starter. Moreover, calling women theologians, quote, "the strawberry on the cake of the Catholic Church," can hardly be viewed as anything other than the Pope patronizing women. We thus wanted with this volume to explore the future of women in the Catholic Church, a future that we hope will go beyond serving as a pretty dessert topping and instead actively include the work and aspirations of real women. Our book examines the possibilities and potentials of the roles, responsibilities, and regulations of women in the Church, as third and fourth wave feminists write about and examine the issues, reforms, progress, and development of new spiritual activism. Here we explore how women are coming to terms with their feminism and Catholicism in the 21st century. And we include as well the voices of those who have left the Roman Catholic Church, examining their reasons and their alternative pursuits. Our volume embodies a spiritually, morally, and ethnically diverse group of writers, some of whom have Latinx and indigenous roots, to reflect the changing populations of Catholic congregants and the ways in which the Church continues to spread its roots throughout the diaspora. Our collection focuses on self-identified third and fourth wave feminists with an eye to the future of the Catholic Church. Bless you. While fourth wave feminism is still a work in progress, there has been much critical literature on third wave feminism. In defining our collection, we rely on R. Claire Snyder's definitive essay, What is Third Wave Feminism?, which delicately works through the third wave's intimate connection with trends already present in second wave feminism, its problematic yet liberating use of postmodern anti-foundationalist discourses, and its utopian strivings for a better future. Snyder also calls attention to the third wave as feminism without exclusion, noting that third wave feminism necessarily embraces a philosophy of non-judgment. Such issues remain active in the fourth wave as well, but fourth wave feminism also embraces body positivity, celebrating empowering representations of bodies of different shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities. And most notably, it is also digitally driven. Critics point out that the fourth wave continues to evolve, and Prudence Chamberlain presents it as an affective temporality, in which a specific period of time engages with and produces affect that in turn engages with and fuels activism. She also highlights how technology has enabled individual women to work together to call out sexism, and how the speed and rapidity of communication facilitate that activism. Thus, many of our writers address issues of social justice, which both domestically and internationally have become even more applicable within feminism and Roman Catholicism. While social justice has a long tradition in the Catholic Church, the Church has prohibited, ignored, or denounced some of the issues most vital to feminists. Reproductive rights remain forbidden. Racism and sexism do not inspire the opposition they should. And despite the Church's opposition to abortion and alleged commitment to human rights, there are many examples of the Church's lack of care and action for people with disabilities. While specific religious orders within the Church and individual Roman Catholic leaders work for social justice, the International Church has not acted on calls from active feminists to speak out on these issues and to clean its own house. Our contributors then address intercultural and interdenominational issues, diversity, human rights, reproductive rights, work, pedophilia in priests, progress and backlash, women's rights and whistleblowers, violence, disability rights, Black Lives Matter, Native American rights, and healthcare. Some demonstrate how certain areas of social justice have seen progress, and others show how women have had to work around the Church to address their concerns. Our contributors also address sexuality and motherhood, two issues that are not always related, but that remain major topics of conversation and contention generally, as well as ones in which contemporary Roman Catholic women have more choices than previous generations. Long familiar topics such as menstruation and reproductive rights remain in active contention, as do questions about interfaith and same-sex marriages. And these issues have developed over time, many have come to the forefront of the conversation. Inspired by feminist theology and feminism more generally, our writers also present Jesus as female or God as mother, redefining gender and gendered language. These active revisions of gender also insist upon spiritual activism and lead many of our writers to envision potential utopias. Memories of the waves of radical rethinking of church practices inspired by the Second Vatican Council, including the adoption of vernacular languages, the emergence of women religious from the habit and movement out into the world, and the welcoming of diversity into the pews cannot be erased by the recent revision or reversion of the liturgy back to patriarchal language or by the Vatican's attack on American nuns. Such attempts to control women's language and agency have only increased women's understanding of ritual, incited women to organize, and inspired women to write their own prayers and develop their own worship. Reflecting on the future is an active question at this singular moment in the very long history of the Roman Catholic Church. While change might be slow to come, just the promise of progress may provide hope for women struggling with the conflicts between their church and their sense of their own spirituality. We invite the readers of this volume to think of their own stories as they read ours and those of our contributors, and we invite you to do so as well, and perhaps to write and share them too. The questions we hope to raise and illuminate by this collection will provide a vital corrective to the contemporary understanding of women's relationships to Catholicism. Rather than simply oppressing or containing women, Catholicism for many women drives or inspires us to challenge literary, social, political, or religious hierarchies. In a time when questions of gender and sexuality provoke intense debates within Catholicism and other Christian traditions, and when religion is more and more frequently invoked in political rhetoric, it is imperative to publish works that address women's debates and struggles with the church. Along with other Christian traditions, as well as Judaism and Islam, Catholicism continues to exist as a powerful force in women's lives. By examining how women attempt to reconcile our unruliness with our Catholic backgrounds or conversions and our future hopes and dreams, the editors and contributors to this volume will offer new perspectives on gender and religion today. Thank you.
Hello, all. I'm Lizzie. I'm going to start by reading the poem that I contributed to the volume, and then I'm just going to say a few words about it after. Fun little exegesis exercise afterwards. So the poem's called She Will Rise. She will rise, not because you have risen her, but because her toes will burrow into the cool dirt, and she will plant her feet into the earth and water her roots with lament. She will rise, not because you offer your hand, but because the scars on her palms from playground bullies have taught her legs that they are stronger than the fall. She will rise. Her hips will house kingdoms, and her womb will birth light. She will shine when she stands, and when she stands, she will invite Mary Magdalens to join her. She will rise. Her vocal cords will expand until her song bursts forth with brave vibrato. In the name of mothers, she will rewrite parables to match their harmonies. She will rise, rise, rise. She will resurrect stories from abandoned graves until they reach lips and tongues. She will find dirt under her fingernails from digging and drink the lost words of our foremothers. Thank you. So as the panelists were doing some prep work for our visit here, Jeana had actually said to me at one point that I was the resident theologian on the panel, to which my first thought was, ruh-roh, as I've been out of practice for quite a while now. But when I wrote this poem back in my undergraduate years, I was very much a practicing theologian, a practicing Catholic, and a practicing feminist. The poem was written as an assignment during a poetry seminar, actually. I had confused my professor several times with both my heavily Catholic and religious themes throughout my poetry, as well as my love poems about my lesbian relationship. It was a blast and a half. So, as the theology gal on the panel tonight, I'd love to discuss some of the theological themes that run through the poem that I was grappling with at the time, and more importantly, how I chose to treat them in the poem. This comes with the disclaimer that much has changed since the time that I wrote it. The biggest life change being that I'm no longer Catholic, or Christian for that matter. But in a lot of ways, many of the thoughts that come through in this piece remain the same. Rising has a persistent way of showing up in Catholic theology. The resurrection of Christ is a nearly unavoidable topic that tags along with most others. When you talk about grace, redemption, sin, original sin, the Trinity, Jesus' life and death, what quickly follows is a discussion of the primacy of the resurrection in the Catholic narrative. The resurrection is God's fulfillment of the covenant, God's submersion of sin, the reason that humanity is redeemed and can enter heaven, God's supreme act of grace. He is risen is a common Easter exclamation that we hear every year during the season. The refrain of my poem perhaps challenges the primacy of Jesus' resurrection with a simple pronoun, she, with a promise that it will be she who will rise. Almost like a prophet, the poem repeats itself, telling of what will come for this she. And each stanza brings more of the Easter joy of her resurrection. The first two stanzas are more like the Good Friday and the Holy Saturday of the Easter Triduum, if you will. As their definers of the first line, she will rise, immediately follow with negative descriptors. Not because you have risen her, and not because you offer her your hand. In every remaining stanza after that, the language shifts to be more hopeful as she finds her voice in the second to last stanza and uses it to spread the good news of other women's stories in the final stanza. It was funny, in my initial draft of the poem, I specifically remember my poetry professor fighting me on the first and second line of the poem. She will rise, not because you have risen her. He said, shouldn't it be not because you've raised her? Risen sounds kind of... And it could have been, but I wanted to keep the clunky risen to kind of flip the risen Christ trope upside down and simultaneously play the pronoun game that she will rise, not because you, i.e. God, had to raise her from the dead. No, she'll do it herself with her very own body. Heck, she'll even produce the water herself with her tears. The rising in this poem is not one that has to be enacted on her by some outside God while she lays powerless. She doesn't need that God to rise. The rising comes from her very body. And as the poem progresses, the action verbs become hers that she will perform herself. She will shine when she stands. She will rewrite parables. She will resurrect stories. She will drink, not the blood of Christ offered at Mass every day in remembrance of him, but she will drink the lost words of our foremothers in remembrance of her. The entire poem is really an effort to reclaim the woman's body from a church that has abused it in myriad ways over the course of history. The church actually acts as the playground bullies who push her down in stanza 2. Feet, palms, legs, womb, vocal cords, lips, tongue, and fingernails all make an appearance. Irreverent parts of the bodies that have been ignored, discounted, taken for granted, held on a pedestal, abused, covered up, and misused by a patriarchal structure for centuries, all in the name of God. In a church that has denied her agency to use her body how she wishes, the real triumph is that she rises anyway. She rises regardless of who says she can or cannot. So before concluding, I would just like to thank you all for your time today. I look forward to any questions or feedback that you have on the poem. It turns out I've never really done like an analysis of it before, but it ended up being a little bit more unruly than I thought it was, even when I wrote it. And I'd also like to express my gratefulness to Jeana and Leigh for including me among the other resilient, intelligent, strong, unruly women who contributed to the volume. And thank you to Dan for welcoming us to St. Mary's.
Well, I know I have a lot to ask and to inquire, and I know that our audience does as well. So I'm going to be brief and just highlight a few things because I'm eager to hear what others would like to present to you. But maybe we can continue with the theme of poetry, which plays such an important role in this volume and in the previous volumes. And thank you, Lizzie, for that exegesis. Powerful, absolutely powerful. I loved your poem on its own, and hearing your experience of writing it and reflecting on it then and now is really striking. I'm reminded that in sharing earlier in Dr. Rebecca Lehman's poetry workshop, Lizzie wasn't able to join us, but Jeana and Leigh both commented that at the end of each of their volumes, for as heavy and at times understandably and righteously pessimistic, perhaps, as some of the themes may be, they always select a poem or an essay that's hopeful at the end to carry us forward. And Lizzie's poem happens to be the one at the end of this volume, so buy the book. But maybe we can stick on the theme of poetry, and I know that we don't have the other poets with us, but as editors and a fellow contributor, maybe you can speak to some of these. I just want to lift up a few of them that struck me, and just to give maybe a potpourri, a selection from which to choose. One by the poet Pat Brisson, called From the Womb of Christ, I found to be one of the most captivating feminist theological reflections on the Eucharist I'd ever seen. One titled My Mary by Adrian Keller. My notes, I just wrote, I loved this. I'll point out that my colleague, Dr. Jessica Koblenz, and I teach a queer theology class here at St. Mary's College, and we are currently in a unit on Mary and the Communion of Saints, and I was thinking of our students as I read and reread that poem. I'm struck by The Annunciation, spelled with an E, authored by Devin E. Kuhn. Like My Mary, this poem electrifies the imagination. It's powerful, its creative format with striking imagery invites the reader to think differently about Mary. And then the poems The Heretic by C.R., I'm going to mess up this name. I wonder if one of the editors, is it Resiteratus? My apologies if our poet is joining us by live stream. I have totally butchered your name. We'll call you CR. And in a second poem titled Unfinished by Marcy Mattery, reflect on the paradox of women in Catholicism and their presence and erasure. The former relays their opting out of the institutional realm. And we heard maybe a little of this in some of Lizzie's exegesis of her own poem. While the latter grapples with what it might mean to be, and here I quote the poem, a theologian and minister in a church that is blind to my vocation. So these are just a few of the many poems that are collected in this volume and the others. I don't know if you don't have to respond to any of those, or you can respond to some of them or all of them. I would love to hear more about the process of selecting the poems, what these poems, how they may have struck you, and maybe to help whet the commercial appetite for our audience to read them themselves. We can hold the microphone.
Yeah, we can do that. It was one of the joys and sometimes frustration of our choosing for which ones we wanted to publish. It actually would go pretty well in general that we'd each prepare a list before we met, and very often we would have some of the same that seemed like the best match for that topic. But sometimes we'd really have to make the case, we have to include this one, we have to include that one. And so I was delighted. I'd marked, in case you all wanted to hear me read some poems, I'd marked some more, but we'll save that for the very end, or maybe afterward. But one of the first ones was My Mary, because...
Would you read that?
Oh boy, okay, let's see. I'll give it a try. An angel describes passionately how great her son will be, A teenager asks, sassily, "Aren't you forgetting one thing? I'm a virgin." The church remembers perfect submissiveness. A small brown mother speaks to her grown son, gives him that look. He sighs and takes care of the wine problem. The church statues, a tall, silent, lily-white woman. An older woman stands erect and unmoving, defying Romans, Jews, and grief itself. To watch her oldest son die a criminal. The church honors a meek, mild, ever virgin. The submissive girl, no respect for her. The church statues, no time for them. The meek, mild, ever virgin, no need for her. Mary the impudent, Mary the importunate, Mary the brave, she is my Mary. Yeah, so that's one that I loved.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites as well. And when we've put these volumes together, for most of them we've gotten more than enough material, and so that was always the hard part, was trying to sort through and decide which pieces to include. So for this one especially, we really were looking for texts that addressed the issues we were trying to address. So that was what we really used as our defining point. Are they really addressing these issues of third and fourth wave feminists? Are they addressing issues of inclusivity and anti-racism and diversity, and that kind of body positivity? So that's how we made those decisions. But we did get all kinds of wonderful materials. So that's why there will always be another volume coming, I think. Would you got this? Sure.
Okay, got it. I loved that poem too. I wanted to talk about that one today in Rebecca's class, but I was unable to make it. But I love the creativity of what actually happened, and then what the church does with Mary, or has done with Mary over the years. And like who is the number one female figure in the Catholic Church? It's Mary, like Mary, the Virgin Mother. And unfortunately, she's just become unattainable for us. She's without sin. She's a virgin. She, doesn't have a, it's frustrating to say the least. But, and I think that's why, in my poem, I was also thinking about Mary Magdalene as a figure, because the church has sure done some things with her too, and decided she's a prostitute, and all of that jazz. So yeah, I do think it's interesting what happens in the dogma and the doctrine of the Catholic Church with her versus her sassiness. Aren't you forgetting one thing? I'm a virgin. Yeah, it was beautifully done.
I was going to ask Lizzie, as the poet contributor on the panel, was there another poem maybe you would like to read in addition to My Mary and your own work, something you'd like to share, and maybe explain what strikes you about that as a fellow poet contributor?
Oh, from
the volume.
From the volume. Oh, sure. I'd like to read the Pat Brisson one. This one is called From the Womb of Christ. This was Pat Brisson. Jesus came to change things. No more sacrificial lambs were to be left on the altar. Now the lamb was to be eaten, so we could become the lamb, and the lamb could become us. Here is Jesus, fully human, with an X chromosome as his most feminine, speaking of an intimacy only a woman can fully realize. Take this, all of you, and eat it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you. Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant. I too have given up my body for my beloved, have sheltered new life in the chalice of my womb, and fed this life with my very blood. I too have made the covenant like no other, a blood promise, a sacred oath, a willingness to sacrifice all for the sake of the other. Always, everywhere, our first bread was milk. This is what it is to be born human, having been nourished on the blood of the host and gathered strength for the journey, to then be pushed out of the nurturing womb, blinking and crying into the light of the world. This is what it is to be born again, to leave the bloody nurturing womb of Christ and to go out into the world following his instructions, to do this in memory of him, to love and to love and to love. Oh. That last line is so good. Yeah, there are several things that struck me about this one. The last line being one of them, the three loves, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you know. But also it was striking me reading it out loud. I've never read it out loud before, to say the words that the men usually say in Mass, take this, all of you, and eat of it. You know, I've met several people, several women who have wanted a chance at the priesthood and couldn't have it for obvious reasons, and there was a lot of pain that came with that. And I love what's happening here with the fluids of women being primary in your life. You know, it's not just I shouldn't say just, it's not, you know, what was the line? Your first bread was milk. It's connecting the Eucharist, right, with it. The first thing that touches your lips is actually milk, and I produce it, you know, the woman produces it. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on here, but you know, not getting a chance at to tell the story in the Mass, I think is a big one for me. Did you all want to say anything more about that one?
You know, I'll say briefly, I love being a Eucharistic minister, and although in my church we the non-ordained, the Eucharistic ministers, we could do the blood, we could do the not the bread, but we could do the blood. But the minute point too, as an editor, is we got to capitalize. We had to argue to get to capitalize bread was milk. The publisher was like, no, that shouldn't be capitalized. We're like, no, it should. It must be capitalized. And him, but bread was milk. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time, and I know that there's, I'm sure, a lot of questions and comments to follow. So there's one thing, though, I want to make sure we draw attention to thematically, and if I may put you on the spot about the next volume, or what's in its nascency, and that will lead me maybe into talking about two essays in particular I would love your three thoughts on.
Yeah, so the next volume is really only like existing in an email to our editor at this point. It hasn't got any further than that. But we were talking about this in the class this morning, that one of the things we've tried to do with these volumes is really address the main issues that are going on in the Catholic Church, in feminism, in these volumes, and try to illuminate them for our readers. And so the conversation we had with our editor is that we would like our next volume to address the ways in which Catholic feminists are responding to a post-Roe world, because I think there might be some very surprising responses. So that's where we're thinking of going next.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's tough as editors or authors who are at an early stage of a project to even talk about this, but there's a method to my madness, which is I hope that in our conversation there might be such enthusiasm that you're encouraged to follow through with that editor, and if the editor has any resistance whatsoever, that it'll be clear. Which brings me to two essays that are related to, again, written and published before the post-Roe, the post-Dobbs context in which we find ourselves. But I wanted to highlight that here at St. Mary's College, we've really been, as an institution, a Catholic women's liberal arts college, a leader in Catholic higher education this year in terms of developing several spaces for critical engagement with the context arising from last summer's Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe. We've hosted a number of faculty discussion events, and so far this semester we've had 2 public lectures, including last Thursday here on campus. With that backdrop, I was so taken with the essay titled, "A Person is a Person." I'm getting chills in the back of my neck just as I'm thinking about it. I found it captivating, moving, challenging, thoughtful, complex, and engaging in the structure and writing style. It's so brilliantly organized. It's also attributed to an anonymous author, the only one in this volume. So maybe my first question is about that, and insofar as you're able and comfortable talking about this essay and its authorship, perhaps you can share some of your own thoughts, particularly Leigh and Jeana as editors, about the decision but behind the anonymity, and maybe just your responses to this essay. And I'll say a little bit more about just one more kind of related essay, and then open it up to the floor.
So this is the first piece we've ever published anonymously. And when this writer submitted it to us, they hadn't said anything in particular about, wanting to be anonymous, but when we asked if we could include it in the volume, they were anxious. They were anxious of being identified. They were anxious of family reading it. And so we did have to work with SUNY Press to see if we could publish it without a name attached. And they did, we had some conversations, and they finally said, yes, we can make that work. Because we really felt strongly about including it.
We really did want to include it, and the author was especially concerned about the mother, that the author loves the mother, respects her mother, and did not want to injure that relationship. But the author also had employment issues where that might be a problem with place of employment if it turned out who the author was. So, but we thought it was terrific, yes, and really wanted to include it, and we were very grateful. They were willing to let us publish it as anonymous.
And this won't do justice, but just for the audience who hasn't perhaps read this essay, could you, in a few sentences, maybe give a summary? It's hard to do because it's so complex, it's so powerful.
I think key points are she would go with her mother to protest at abortion clinics. Sorry about the pronoun, but that was a tradition they had. They would go and protest, and as the author's personal feelings changed, her belief in what was faith, and wasn't entirely clear where they were at the point of writing it, but not comfortable with that anymore. But she would still do it with the mother, because that was this ritual they had, that was time together. It was so important to the mother. So she continued to do it, and but it was a point that had become a problem.
And then she is in a position of having a young woman she knows needing to end a pregnancy, and being asked if she can help her, and ends up helping her go to an abortion clinic and end the pregnancy, despite despite the beliefs she has grown up with. So it's a very kind of conflicted and thoughtful essay.
I think what I particularly love about that, and thank you for the summary and for the sharing, is it highlights this complexity. You leave with a sense that the author is still grappling with things that are not so black and white, not so simple, which leads me to Kelly, is it Hedgelin Bowen's essay? Again, a very deeply moving essay titled Mystic Trinities, and I learned from her bio at the end that this is a working title for a longer memoir, and I can't wait for that to come out. But it's also a very human, very intimate, very honest look at the complexities of the expected and unexpected difficulties of trying to conceive children at the intersection of faith and religious traditions. So I don't know, maybe Lizzie, I don't know if you're familiar with that one, I don't want to put you on the spot, but our editors as well, not as much. So maybe thoughts about that particular essay as well.
Well, I do think it addresses a lot of the complexities that many people are raising right now, post-Dobbs, in terms of decisions that mothers or expectant mothers have to make about pregnancies that get complicated, and pregnancies that will not be viable, and women who really want children but are in a position of needing an abortion, despite all their wishes to have that child, that it's not a viable pregnancy, and so I think it really speaks to the health care issues involved around abortion and the ways in which it becomes a necessary medical procedure for some women who would not otherwise even consider it.
Just that so many of these issues are not published, and it's the kind of thing we'll talk about with our dear friend, and that's it. And then so being able to publish something like this so that those of us who've never experienced it or maybe don't have the friend who has, to be able to read about it, it meant a lot to us.
So with that, Dr. Julia Fetter has a microphone out for our in-person audience. So if folks have a comment or question for our panelists, if you would raise your hand and she'll come to you. And our folks joining us virtually, if you want to post those to the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, that will be relayed to us here. Thank you, I guess.
Okay, so you guys talked about the women role in the church, and so in my religion class we're talking about the figures and that they're all male. So would you guys hope to bring in awareness to having more female figures in the church? Because obviously it's not being talked about enough.
Yes. We were asked kind of a similar question in the class this morning, and if we thought that our books would have any impact, and we can hope that they do, but at the time we said that if any positive change is going to come in the church, it's going to come through us, through those of us who are willing to speak out and to act and to fight for those changes. They won't happen on their own. And I think that's, those of us who identify as Catholic or former Catholic or recovering Catholic or whatever the case may be, we are the ones who have to make that change happen.
What would your guys' response be to the people who say that the future of the Catholic Church is based on the younger generation, including young women who are leaning more towards the traditional views of the church?
All I can say is, that's an excellent question. And because just with time, that's what will happen, is the younger generation will be the future of the Catholic Church. But then what to do about what the younger generation believes. And it's so hard to say when there's such a wide range of beliefs. but I mean, I'm almost curious to ask you. Yeah, do you see a certain future?
The microphone's making its way over. Plenty of time to think.
I definitely see a future where they continue going down the path that they are, not like some change happening, of course, but not necessarily any major changes towards what's described more at the beginning of the book that would be hoped for.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question is, how would any of you respond to St. Mary's College response to the denial of having a pro-choice for reproductive rights and women's health on campus when they are solely choosing the Bells for Life group organization here? Yeah, I guess like a response and any, I guess like thoughts you could share with any students who could use support in that topic.
Maybe I can just offer some context, just because our guests are not familiar with what's going on here. I believe the question is referring to a unaffiliated student group that is identified as SMICs for Choice, who have petitioned for recognition by the student government and by the college administration, and at present don't have that recognition, where there is a Bells for Life, a student club that has recognition. And so I don't know that it's appropriate for our guests to comment on something they're not directly related to, but your second point of the question may be a good one, which if you want to restate that regarding, what advice our panelists might have for young women who are seeking to be advocates, or I think you were speaking.
That's basically it. Yeah, I guess advice for seeking any advocates or support for more how to possibly start more open discussions about like unruly Catholic feminism on this campus when it's sort of seems to be the minority, at least from my experience here.
I mean, I would say two things. I would say first, speak out, and second, find your allies. Work with other women or with other individuals who share your beliefs and your convictions, and find strength in that, because again, it's the Margaret Mead quote, right? Like, it only takes I'm gonna butcher this quote, but
the panelists are on the closer to college age, though. You're a ways out. Do you have any advice to younger women, following the questioner's great prompt, or maybe other thoughts you might have?
Yeah, I was just, I was reflecting on how much time I spent being so mad in grad school and a lot of college. And I think there was definitely a place for that, and a righteous anger kind of motivation to create that change. I think it is difficult when you're in the context of Catholic university. I went to Catholic school my entire life, like literally my entire life, and I think I did feel stuck a lot, because a lot of the things that I was saying was, bumping up against Catholic teaching very directly, women, priests, LGBT causes. And, I think to Jeana's point, like there are folks who are listening to that. And I think there has been some, maybe not enough, but there has been some movement in the church. And there are a lot of people who are staying and fighting the good fight. I am not one of them, but I think there is such a rich tradition and ritual in the Catholic Church that draws people in so very dearly. And, it's worth the the fight and the anger and the frustration and having the difficult conversations, no matter what it is. Like, I truly believe that women are called to the priesthood. And, you know, there were a lot of women who were willing to engage in that, a lot of men who were willing to engage in that discussion. So, yeah, you know, keep fighting the good fight and stay if it's the right place for you, you know. And if it's not, that's okay too.
I just wanted to jump in with one case I experienced personally. I have a neighbor who's Catholic, and we have a church just down the street that has a priest who stopped serving communion whenever he knew that anyone was gay. So he would no longer offer them communion. And this drove a large number of the congregation away. But in my Episcopal church, we're having a sacred ground reading group discussion, and he joined it. And he wants to work with other faiths. He's staying in his church. He wants to do everything he can to keep that church together, work with his fellow congregants when so many left, understandably. But he's sticking to it, and he is an inspiration for me to be that brave and committed, and not to let that church go, not to let it become, you know, this doctrine right there of the most conservative parts of the practice right now.
I guess kind of piggybacking off that last question, I'm a student leader here on campus, and I'm part of the post-op committee. So I guess any advice that you would have of like how to be able at a Catholic institution be able to engage people in talking about these topics, not just you know, abortion and stuff, but also like sex education, that I feel the Catholic Church leans away from a lot of the time, and how we can do that at an institution that doesn't always like, or as I guess like in the Catholic as a whole, the church not always like promoting, teaching their like younger like us girls, the women, how to, you know, be safe in sexual stuff like that, and just how to engage people in that conversation without, you know, I guess, just getting people to engage in it and not having so much backlash and not seeing it as black and white. If you have any advice. Sorry, that was a lot.
I'm gonna. I'll confess ahead of time, I'm not tech savvy, but I have a group in my suburb. We're the inclusion and equity group, and one way we've communicated is through a wide variety of Facebook groups. And I know that for young people, Facebook is not the major means of communication, but you'll know what is. And that's one thing we do is we'll just post, and then we'll get lots of negative responses sometimes. But we keep doing it, and then we find out who neighbors are who share these ideas, wishes, beliefs, and sometimes people will thank us, you know. And I've learned sometimes, oh, that neighbor, you know, she's on our side, and so I think using those, and as long as you know that you're going to get some backlash, if you're willing to do it. And then, of course, like sometimes we'd be deleted from groups and we'd have to work our way back on or start a new one. But that's one way that we have been pursuing it. So, but you'll know how to do that.
Well, there's an unruly group of women in the church that I would like to mention, and that is the Roman Catholic women priests. And this is a movement. If you Google Roman Catholic women priests, you will be astounded that they are validly ordained, they are illicit, which means against the law, but they have been ordained by a valid male bishop back in 2000. They have evolved now until they have their own bishops ordaining. Are they in parishes above ground? No. Are they ministering to a lot of people? Yes. So that is a group that I would certainly label unruly and feisty. The other thing that I think is important for young Catholic women is to connect with old Catholic women who know the history and who know the changes that have happened. You know, women who, like when I was growing up, I'm one of the elderly ones, you know, Virgin Mary was not a disconnect when I was a kid, and then feminine consciousness hit me, and I realized that I could not imitate Mary because I could not be both. I had to choose, and our tradition says she didn't. You know, so it's things like that that have come to me because of feminism and the development of my feminine consciousness. And so, you know, we really are evolving, and the Spirit, blessed be she, is going to win over patriarchy. It's just going to take a while, but it's in the process of happening already, I believe.
Well, I think the panelists, I could hear, you may not be able to hear online, but we were hearing a lot of amen. So we are at time, and before I invite you to join me for a final note of thanks, I just want to do one connection. Leigh, in the summarization of the previous volumes, talked about the Unruly Catholic Nuns volume and mentioned two of many unruly Catholic inspirations in that volume. One is Sister Janine Gramick, who we were privileged to host for a lecture here at the Center for Spirituality at St. Mary's College last fall. And another is Sister Simone Campbell, famously of Nuns on a Bus, who will be speaking here at the International Thomas Merton Society Conference in June here at St. Mary's College. So mark your calendars to come hear some more unruly, exciting, inspiring lectures and presentations. Let me just say, what a gift, what a service, what a challenge, what an inspiration this volume and the series has been and continues to be to the church and to the academy and to all of us gathered here. I hope that those joining us remotely and in person are inspired, challenged, feeling gifted to go and get a copy of this book for yourselves. We've only just touched the surface of the depth that's present there. So please join me in thanking Leigh, Jeana, and Lizzie for taking time, for traveling to be with us, to share a little bit about their excellent volume, Unruly Catholic Feminists, and they'll be happy to chat with you more outside. But for the time being, thank you very much.